Welcome back, explorers, to Whoosh Tales, the home of the greatest kids' adventure stories anywhere on the internet, bringing you a brand new English story for children every single week. This is episode 21. And before we begin today, I want to ask you a question about every adventure we have shared together so far. 20 episodes, the edge of the world, deep space, the hidden city under the sea, the living forest, the breathing mountain, the chamber at the heart of the world, Kalimpong, the Arabian Sea, London, the Welsh harbor. In every single one of those stories, there's been someone quietly present in almost every scene who has packed the flasks and drawn the charts and held the family together and never once asked for the story to be about her. Today, finally, it is. The letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, 10 days after the family had returned from Wales. It had been an unusually quiet 10 days by the standards the Walker household had become used to. No compass needles turning, no strange lights in gardens. Simply the ordinary good rhythm of a Highland summer settling into its second half. Margaret had gone back to her attic room to organize the journal's remaining 17-chamber entries into a cleaner working order. Old Thomas had been teaching Caleb some of the older traditional songs that the journal mentioned old ones had once used to settle particularly frightened chamber creatures, singing them slowly on the back step in his cracked old voice while Caleb listened and learned. Finn had spent most of the 10 days simply being 10 years old, climbing trees with village friends he had not seen properly all summer, helping Mrs. McTavish stake her enormous tomato plants, sleeping late on 2 separate mornings in a way that felt, after everything, like an enormous and well-earned luxury. Nora had spent the 10 days doing what Nora always did. She had finished refining her chart of the 17 chambers into something so clear and so beautifully organized that Margaret had asked, only half joking, whether Nora might consider taking over the running of the entire archive one day. She had gone to the family's accounts with her mother and had quietly noticed and mentioned gently that they were going to need a slightly more sustainable system for covering the cost of all this traveling, and had already sketched out 3 sensible ideas by the time her mother had finished being surprised that her daughter had thought of it first. She had reorganized the pantry. She had taught herself, from a book borrowed from the village library, the basics of celestial navigation, on the theory that it might one day be useful if Ember ever needed a human backup for finding her way, and had proven the theory correct sooner than anyone expected by successfully cross-checking their position during the flight home from Wales using nothing but the stars and a small brass instrument she had built herself out of a protractor and a length of string. Nobody in the family had ever quite stopped to notice, out loud, that Nora was doing an extraordinary amount of extraordinary work. It was simply what Nora did, the way breathing was simply what everyone did, and it had somehow never occurred to anyone, including Nora herself, that this was worth remarking on. The letter changed that. Their mother sorted the posts at the kitchen table, as she always did, and this time she paused at a plain cream-colored envelope with careful looping handwriting and read the front of it twice before she said anything at all. Then she looked up, and there was something in her expression that made the whole table go quiet before she had even spoken. "Nora," she said slowly, in a tone of genuine surprise, "this one is for you." Nora looked up from the bread she was buttering. "For me?" she repeated. Their mother turned the envelope around so Nora could see the front of it. Miss Nora Walker, it read, in the same careful looping handwriting. Stonehaven Village, the Highlands, Scotland. The kitchen was very quiet. Finn realized, watching his sister's face, that he had genuinely never seen Nora look surprised in quite this particular way before. Not the alert, ready surprise she brought to strange lights or dragon crashes, but something softer and more uncertain. The surprise of someone who spent her whole life assuming that letters simply were not, as a category of object, addressed to her. She took it carefully. She opened it with the same neat, efficient movements she brought to everything. But Finn noticed her hands were not quite as steady as usual. She read it silently first. Then, when she looked up, her eyes were bright in a way that made their mother reach over and take her other hand without being asked. "Read it to us," Caleb said gently. Nora took a breath and read aloud. "Dear Miss Walker, please forgive the directness of this letter and the fact that I am writing to you specifically rather than to your family in general, but I have made some careful inquiries and I have been told, quite emphatically, by more than one person, that if I truly want this particular problem solved properly, You are precisely the person I should be writing to. My name is Elspeth Fraser, and I taught primary school for 31 years in a small town on the edge of the Cairngorms called Dunbeth Corrie before my retirement 3 years ago. I have heard, through channels I will not pretend to fully understand, that your family has a remarkable gift for helping with things that seem impossible, and that you in particular have a gift for organizing, planning, and holding things together that has been quietly noticed by more than one person you have helped along the way. My request is not about dragons or ancient chambers or magic of the kind I understand your brothers deal with. It is about 11 children. Since our small local school was forced to close last year due to falling numbers, these 11 children, ranging in age from 6 to 13, have had nowhere organized to go during the long summer weeks, their parents mostly working long hours at the nearby distillery and unable to arrange proper care. They have been, in effect, left to look after themselves and each other, and while they are good, resourceful, kind children, they are drifting quite badly, without the structure and purpose that children of that age genuinely need, and I am too old now and too alone to organize anything for them by myself, no matter how much I would like to. I do not need magic, Miss Walker. I need someone with a gift for building something real out of very little, and for making 11 very different children feel, all at once, that they are part of something worth belonging to. I am told that this is exactly what you do. Would you be willing to come and see for yourself? With sincere and hopeful regards, Elspeth Fraser. Nora set the letter down slowly on the table. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then their mother, still holding Nora's hand, said very softly, "Well, there it is." Somebody finally wrote to the right person for exactly the right reason. Caleb was the first to speak properly. He looked at his sister with an expression Finn recognized, the same warm, steady pride Caleb had shown watching Priya hug him in her garden, the pride of someone who deeply loved another person and was delighted to see the world finally catching up to what it had always known about them. "Nora," he said quietly, "this is yours. This whole thing is yours. You do not need either of us for this one." Nora looked at him properly, and Finn watched something shift in his sister's face, a small flicker of doubt, quickly suppressed. The kind of doubt that comes from spending years quietly assuming your role in every story is to support the people whose gifts are more visible than your own. "I do not have a compass," she said. "I do not glow. I cannot heal a dying tree or comfort an ancient sleeping rock." Their mother squeezed her hand firmly. "No," she agreed. "You cannot. You can do something considerably rarer than any of that, my darling. You can look at a mess of 11 children, and no resources, and no structure, and no plan. And within a week you will have built something out of it that actually works and lasts and matters, because that is precisely what you've been quietly doing for this entire family, since the night a dragon first crashed into our garden. Nobody taught you that. Nobody gave it to you in a mountain chamber. You simply always had it, and you have simply always used it, mostly without anyone properly noticing, including yourself, Margaret, who had come down from her attic room partway through the reading and had been listening from the doorway, came forward now and sat down at the table properly. "I want to say something, if I may," she said, in her gentle, careful way. "I spent 15 years working beside your grandfather, and in all that time, do you know what he told me more than once that he worried about most? Not whether Caleb's gift would arrive safely, not whether the map would be completed. He worried, quite specifically, about whether there would be someone strong enough and steady enough to hold the whole family together while the 2 boys did the more visible parts of the work. He used to say, 'The gift matters enormously, Margaret, but the gift is nothing at all without someone who can carry it steadily through an ordinary life.' He never knew you, Nora. He died before you were even 5 years old. But I promise you, with complete certainty, that if he could see you now, he would tell you that you are doing exactly what he always hoped somebody in this family would turn out to be able to do." Nora's eyes were very bright by the end of this. She wiped them quickly with the back of her hand in the brisk, practical way she did most things, and then she picked the letter back up and read it a third time, more slowly, and Finn watched his sister's face settle, gradually, into something he had genuinely never seen on her before. Not doubt, not surprise, but a kind of quiet, dawning ownership. "This is mine," her expression said, as clearly as if she had spoken the words aloud. "This is actually, finally, entirely mine." She looked up at the table. "All right," she said, in a voice that had already begun, almost imperceptibly, to sound like someone planning. "I will need 3 days to prepare properly before I go. I will need to write back to Mrs. Fraser and ask some careful questions first. What resources the town actually has, what space might be available, whether the parents themselves have been consulted about any of this, or whether I will be arriving to a situation nobody has actually agreed to yet." She paused, thinking. "And I think," she added, looking at Finn and Caleb, "that I would like to go alone, not because I do not want you both there, but because I think this needs to be something I build myself from the very beginning, without either of you standing behind me, however kindly. If it works, I want it to be because of what I did. And if it does not work at first, I want to be the one who fixes it." Finn felt something warm and proud settle in his chest, looking at his sister sitting up very straight at the kitchen table with a letter in her hand. And he understood, in that moment, more clearly than he ever had before, exactly what kind of person Nora Walker actually was. Underneath all the flasks of tea and the beautifully organized charts and the quiet, steady competence that the family had simply come to expect from her, without ever quite stopping to marvel at it. "Of course," he said. "Of course you should go alone. You do not need us for this. You never really did." Their mother spent the rest of that day helping Nora prepare a reply to Elspeth Fraser, a careful, thorough, genuinely impressive letter, Finn thought, watching his sister draft it 3 times at the kitchen table before she was satisfied, asking exactly the right questions, in exactly the right order, with exactly the right combination of warmth and practicality. It went out in the post the next morning. The reply came back within 4 days, full of relieved and grateful answers to every question Nora had asked, and by the end of that week it had been arranged. Nora would fly to Dunbeth Quarry on Ember. Ember insisted, quite firmly, on being involved at least that much, even if she was going to have to wait patiently in a nearby field while Nora did the actual work, and would spend 2 full weeks there, staying with Mrs. Fraser in her small cottage, meeting the 11 children, and building whatever it was she was going to build. The morning Nora left, the whole family gathered in the garden to see her off. She had packed with the same careful thoroughness she brought to everything, a proper notebook, a set of colored pencils she had bought specially, 3 different books about organizing activities for children of mixed ages that she had found in the village library, and, Finn noticed with a small private smile, exactly 3 flasks of tea, because some habits, apparently, were not going anywhere no matter how independent the mission. She hugged her mother for a long moment. She hugged Caleb, who whispered something in her ear that made her laugh properly for the first time since the letter had arrived. She hugged Finn last, and held on slightly longer than usual, and said quietly, against his shoulder, "Thank you for not being surprised that I could do this." Finn pulled back and looked at his sister properly. "Nora," he said, "honestly, I have never once in my entire life been surprised by anything you can do. I think you might be the only person in this family I have never once had to wonder about." She climbed onto Ember's back, alone, for the first time in the whole series, without either brother beside her, and Ember lifted off from behind the cottage into bright Highland morning, and Finn stood in the garden with his mother and Caleb and Margaret and old Thomas, watching his sister grow smaller and smaller against the pale summer sky, flying off to build something entirely her own, out of nothing but 11 children, and a letter, and her own quiet, extraordinary gift for making. Things work, and that, the lesson at the heart of this kid's adventure story for explorers, is one of the most important lessons this whole series has offered, and it is one worth sitting with very carefully. In almost every family, and in almost every group of friends, and in almost every team, there is someone who does a quiet work that makes everything else possible. The one who remembers the flasks of tea, who draws the charts nobody asked for, but everybody needs, who notices what has to be done before anyone else has even seen the problem. That person's gift is very often the least visible one in the room. It does not glow. It does not point toward hidden chambers. It does not ride dragons to the edge of the world. But it is every bit as real and every bit as necessary as any of the more dramatic and more obviously magical gifts around it. And very often, the whole extraordinary structure of everyone else's adventures would simply collapse without it. If you are the quiet organizer in your own life, the planner, the packer of flasks, the drawer charts, know today, clearly and completely, that your gift matters enormously, even when nobody has thought to say so out loud. And if you are lucky enough to have a quiet organizer in your own life, holding everything together while you get to do the more visible, more celebrated parts of the work, tell them, today if you can. They have almost certainly been waiting far longer than you realize to hear it. Hey, explorers! If you sat at that kitchen table today and watched Nora Walker receive her very own letter for the very first time in this whole series, give this video the biggest thumbs up it has ever received because she has absolutely earned every single moment of it. Our comment question today might be the most important one we have ever asked. Who is the quiet organizer in your own life? The one who makes everything work but rarely gets the spotlight. Tell us about them in the comments below. And if you can, tell them directly today too. Every single response will be read with real gratitude. Subscribe to Whoosh Tales right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single adventure story for kids. Because next week Nora arrives alone in the small Cairngorms town of Dunbeth Corrie, without either brother beside her for the very first time, to meet the 11 children nobody else has been able to reach. We will see you next week, explorers. Hush! That evening, back at the cottage, Finn stood in the quiet garden after everyone else had gone inside and looked up at the darkening highland sky in the direction Ember had flown that morning. He thought about his sister, somewhere out there now in a small stone cottage on the edge of the Cairngorms, probably already sitting at somebody else's kitchen table with her notebook open and her colored pencils lined up neatly, already beginning, in her own quiet, unglamorous, extraordinary way, to build something real out of very little. He thought about how many times over the past 20 adventures Nora had been the one steadying everyone else, and how it had taken a stranger's careful letter addressed to her and her alone for the whole family to finally stop and properly see it. He made himself a quiet, private promise, standing there in the darkening garden, that he was never again going to let that particular kind of quiet gift go unnoticed in his own life, not in Nora and not, he suspected, in anyone else he ever came to love. Then he went inside and closed the door gently behind him, and the cottage settled into its evening rhythms, one member smaller for a fortnight, and somehow, in exactly the right way, one member stronger for it too.